take a look at power and weakness. Honestly, I've been enjoying myself too much with the games I've been playing recently. In particular, the last one I played, Colonial over there, was one. Hey, I've got a Zoom that works now. How about that? Yeah, exciting. Was one that I enjoyed far more than I respect. This is the opposite side of that. This is a game that I think is actually a pretty cool game, but I've played it twice now, both opposed with my wife, and I really despised it. The first time I rated it a 4, and the second time during this recent storm, I found it too frustrating to complete. It really gets at me. I may not be able to finish this, but I figure I'll be able to showcase a little bit of it. It's a little too chess-like in some ways, in the sense that, like, I don't feel like it solos at all reasonably. I can get away with Go, I can't get away with chess, I don't know about this. It also reminds me a little bit of SPI's Sorcerer, which I'm sure is kicking around somewhere over there. It is. But in a much stripped down version. Sorcerer has dice and things. This does not have a lot of luck. This is much more Euro-ish. It's a 2-player competitive game. It's got some really interesting ideas, and it infuriates me to play it. Okay, let's take a look at the rules, and this will probably be a quick hit. Okay, first thing, you have a bunch of, well, let's take a look at the pieces. You got a bunch of cubes. These represent your knights, and these represent your magicians. And you're going to be fighting on kind of 2 planes, alternating cycles, turns, whatever. We'll call them cycles because that's what the game calls, because players have individual turns within those cycles. And trying to remember. It is a variable number based on the amount of time that there is in the game. And there will start off to be 4 cubes in the time chart. Certain actions are going to remove cubes from the time chart. And because there are 4 of them, there will be I didn't see that one, so there will be 7 of these counters available for players to choose from. These are the action tiles, and they are kind of the meat of what you're going to be doing. Okay. The initial setup is randomized with these little discs. The discs represent a type of terrain, which will require that you have certain types of influence counters to be able to attack or affect in certain ways. But they also represent magical connections. And you're going to have 2 different types of cycles. You have magical cycles, in which case the magical connections are active, and you have, I guess, more mundane cycles, in which case the magical cycles are not active. Regular geographical concerns are in place, however. The magical cycles, geographical concerns are not in place, just these magical connections are. And this is kind of a crappy setup in some ways, because like all the blue is together here and all the red is kind of linked together. But that can happen, you know, it is completely random. It did happen. Okay, so one of the key concepts in the game is the concept of neighboring with normal spaces. During a night turn or a cycle, spaces are adjacent if they share a border. With the magical cycle, spaces are only adjacent if they have the same color piece. And that creates some real perturbances in terms of how the game works, because those colors are not just for adjacency, they also affect which tiles that you can play to affect spaces. Each player starts with a stock of pieces, but they also have a reserve of pieces, which are ones that are available to be used right away. You're going to be continuously pulling pieces down from your stock into your reserve, but then as you lose pieces, they go back to your stock. Okay. The sequence of play for any cycle, first thing is you will be taking 2 active pieces. Active pieces are going to be pieces of the current cycle. The game starts in a magical cycle, so each player will be getting 2 of these to begin with. Okay. Then, on all but the first cycle, you'll be drawing one of these counters, and that'll have a number. I think it ranges from like 4 to 8, which is the number of cubes that the cycle is going to last. How long, how many actions it essentially takes, but only certain actions are going to apply. Then, whoever has the least victory points, which are going to be tracked up here, gets to take their turn first. And each player turn is going to consist of 2 actions. However, if the players are tied, whoever has the fewest active regions, active being, okay, the idea of an active region is defined as a region in which there are more active pieces than there are non-active pieces. So for example, in the mage round, this would be an active region. This would not. This would not, etc. Okay. If both of those determinants are tied, then you randomize to determine which player will be going first, and a special rule kicks in. That first turn of the cycle will only have 1 action. Normally it'll have 2. Okay, during the player's turn then, they get a choice of these, 4 different actions that they can pick, and they can pick 2 iterations of those. They can both be the same one. Okay, the first one is take an action tile. You grab one of these tiles and you say, yep, I want that. And we'll explain what the different tiles do in a little bit. Okay. This doesn't cost anything except one of your actions, unless the action tile has a lightning bolt on it. Then by picking it, you don't get to just take it. Instead, what happens is each player takes a pile, takes all their active pieces in hand, selects a certain number that they want to bid on it. If they win the bid, they have to pay those pieces to get that action, and then that action is triggered immediately under their control, in their favor, however you want to put it. If both players tie, it was a wasted use of an action, and the tile is discarded and cannot be used, no matter what the tile is discarded. I don't believe it uses up time, but I may be mistaken of that if nobody bids on it. But if it's fired off, it uses up one of these cubes and it goes away. Once all of these cubes run out, for whatever reason, the cycle immediately ends, and you'll score that cycle. Okay. The next choice is to place a piece. In this case, you take an active piece from your reserve, i.e. it's available, and you can put it on any empty space on the board or any space that you control. The next one is recruit. In general, you take 2 active pieces from your stock and move them to your reserve. The first time somebody does this in a given cycle, though, they get to take 3 pieces. If you don't have enough pieces, you get less. This action spends a cube, bringing the end of the turn closer. And the final thing you can do is you can use as many action tiles as you have. And up to as many as you have. Each one that you use, though, is going to expend a cube. And that basically, when you do the use an action tile, quite often you're running a sequence of actions to try to get yourself to the end, to some end state that you want to be at at the end of the cycle so that you're in position to score that cycle effectively. Each cycle is worth 1 victory point. And I'll get to the scoring. Whoever has the most active regions, and remember again, you have to have the majority of active pieces in a region and you control it. Whoever has the most active regions on the board gets 1 victory point. But then you each count up the number of active regions you control and you add it to your victory point score, and if you reach 12 on that temporary thing that doesn't get added to your victory track, if you reach 12 total on that, you've won the game. That is pretty much it for the core rules. So let's look at what some of these tiles do, because they're a little different. Yeah, they each have their own special rules, and they're all summed up on here, and this is written in English and German. I find it easier to look in the rule book, so I'll have the rule book open. My eyes aren't good enough for the tiny little writing on there. Okay, so let's take a look at the lightning bolt ones. And remember, when a lightning bolt is put up, you bid on it, and it's going to cost a cube if it's fired off, I believe. No, either way the cube is lost. So yeah, there's cost to doing one of these. So some of them just have a victory point on them. Whoever wins gets a permanent victory point on the track. The Rebellion, we have one of those here. What that allows you to do is look to one space on the board and remove up to 2 of your opponent pieces from that space. Spaces will only have one player's pieces, but they may have both knights and mages. Then there's change a region marker. You get to select any region on the board and replace it with one of these. So for example, if I wanted to turn this red, I would take this off the board and put a red one there, and this one would be available for someone else to do that. That can be a very powerful move. The victory point, well, victory points are worth a lot. You know, I mean, a whole cycle is worth a victory point unless it ends the game, in which case it's worth perhaps quite a few more. This one can be very powerful in terms of weakening somebody's position before things. Okay, there's a limitation on placing pieces. When you place a piece, you cannot place, gotta remember what the word is. You cannot place a piece into a region in which you already have more than 3 pieces. So you can place the 4th piece in a region, but no more than that. That's important. It's not a stacking limitation, it's just a restriction on that particular action. Recruiting we've already completely explained. Use action tiles. Let's talk about the different action tiles. So some of them have the symbols of these on there. Those can be used for a couple of different things. One is you are able to reinforce that space. You take an active piece from your reserves, not the stock, the reserves are the things that are available, and you put it into either an empty region or a region that you control that has that symbol on it. There is no limit to the number of pieces that you can put down here. So this has 2 advantages. One, you can stack higher than 4 by doing this. And 2, remember, you can play as many of these at once as you want, so you can, if you have a series of the same color or whatever, you can play a number of different pieces on the board at the same time. The other thing is you can do a takeover, which is the conflict resolution for this game. Okay. For a takeover, you look to an opponent's region which has the same symbol as you're firing off. So like here, if I want to attack keys, I would need a key piece. If I want to attack castles, I would need a castle piece. Then I add up all my adjacent active pieces as the attacker, and I have a number from that. Now remember, adjacency is just by color group when you're in a mage cycle, and it's just by physical locale when you have a knight cycle. So I add up all my pieces that are adjacent. The defender adds up all his pieces that are, I'm sorry, all my active pieces that are adjacent. The defender adds up all his pieces, active and passive, that are in the region, and all active pieces that are adjacent, that can reinforce. Again, adjacency is always determined by that. If the attacker has more pieces than a higher total than the defender has lost the region. The defender loses all but one piece, and one piece is allowed to retreat into an adjacent space, following adjacency rules. That one piece can be either active or passive, and it's allowed to retreat into either empty spaces or into a space containing their own pieces. No limitation on stacking. Okay, all the other pieces go back to the stock, and the attacker, we're assuming they're always successful. There's no reason to make this attack without, because otherwise, well, I mean, you can burn these things just to get rid of chips in that way, but if the attacker has an active piece in his stock, in his reserve, he can place it into that empty space. Okay. Those are the major pieces. These are what there's the most of them, and they're kind of the most effective, but you have some others. You have these guys here. When you play one of these, you will get +1 strength on any combat involving the color indicated. Just +1, yeah. This is the movement tile. We have an indication of this. Any two adjacent areas, you may swap pieces back and forth between those areas and reallocate them. Seems expensive. It can be very powerful. Sea movement. When you play a sea movement tile, you can go from any coastal region to any empty movement. You can use empty regions as well. It doesn't have to be both your own. You can go to either an empty or controlled region, and you can ship from one coastal region to another, but you can't swap between them the way you can with the movement tile. Shipping is only one way. Merlin. You can play Merlin as if he's any one of these. Here's Merlin. And then there's a snake. You can play the snake. You play it during someone else's turn. You have to have a cube available to expend for it. So if somebody plays their, let's say we're like this, and I'm making a green attack, my cube's removed, the snake can no longer be played, but I get to resolve my action. But if it was like this, and I played green and played this, the snake could be played to cancel out the green action, and then it just doesn't happen. But because it is a tile fly, even though it's in the opponent's turn, it eats up a cube, and it cannot be played unless it can eat up a cube. It cancels out any other tile. That's its main effect. Okay, some of these pieces have some symbols which are for recruitment. Let's take a look at the ship. So for example, that'll recruit two mage pieces. And like the recruitment that happens as an action, basically you can pull 2 units from stock into your reserves. Merlin's a little special. He gives you the option of choosing either 2 circles or 2 cubes. This one gives 2 cubes, etc. Not all the pieces have that capability. These guys do not, and the lightning bolts do not. That is the entirety of the game. All right. Let me swap batteries, and we'll start playing probably tomorrow morning, because I don't really want to actually start playing today.